In April of 2024, in a hollow on the eastern edge of the Daniel Boone National Forest in Letcher County, Kentucky, a 58-year-old trapper named Wendell Hatcher walked up on the carcass of a 138-pound mountain lion that had been killed, posed sitting upright against the base of a beech tree, and left there with its eyes still open and its front paws folded across its chest the way an undertaker folds the hands of a body before a viewing.
The animal he found is not supposed to exist. The federal government formally declared the eastern cougar extinct in 2011 and removed it from the endangered species list in 2018. According to the official record, there are no breeding mountain lions east of the Mississippi River. According to the official record, what Wendell Hatcher walked up on that morning is biologically impossible. But Wendell Hatcher is not a man who imagines things. He is a third-generation trapper with 19 years underground at the Bledsoe mine on his back, almost 200 pelts a season for the last 15 years on his ledger, and a reputation in the Kentucky fur takers community for being the kind of man you call when something in the woods does not add up. He has been pulling animals out of these mountains since he was 11 years old. He knows what a bear kill looks like. He knows what a coyote kill looks like. He knows the difference between a cat that has died of disease and a cat that has died of something else. And what he saw at the base of that beech tree is the part he still cannot talk about, almost 2 years later, without his hands going still on the table in front of him. And it is not the only one. 3 weeks after that morning, Wen found a second cougar on a different part of the same trap line, killed the same way, posed differently but with the same care. 168 miles south of that ridge, on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, a wildlife biologist was pulling images off a trail camera and seeing something that none of his 9 years of training and 2 million prior trail cam images had prepared him to see. And almost 40 years before either of those incidents, in the same mountain range, a Forest Service technician filed a report describing the same wound on the same animal in the same posture, and was quietly told to file a different one. Tonight, I want to walk you through all three. None of these men knew about the others. They are separated by states, by decades, by careers. They have one thing in common, which is that the animal they all describe finding, the cougar, the panther, the eastern mountain lion that does not exist anymore, was killed by something the cats themselves are afraid of. Something that the people sitting in offices in Frankfurt and Nashville and Atlanta would prefer you never sit with for very long, and you won't want to miss this one. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Thanks. I want to start with Wen, because Wen is the reason I went looking for the other two stories in the first place. Wendell Hatcher. Wen, to anybody who has known him longer than 10 minutes, was 58 years old in the spring of 2024. He was born and raised in Letcher County, Kentucky, in a hollow just outside the town of Cumberland. His grandfather ran trap lines on the same ridges back in the 1940s, in the years when the coal companies were buying up everything in eastern Kentucky, and the trappers were one of the only ways anyone in the hollow saw cash that did not come back to a company store on payday. His father trapped too. Wen grew up knowing the exact spot on his grandfather's old line where a grey fox would walk through every January like it was an appointment. He inherited the line. He inherited the knowledge of how to read it. He spent 19 years underground at the Bledsoe mine before his back finally gave out in 2009. After that, the trapping went from the thing he did on weekends to most of how he kept the lights on. He pulled around 200 pelts a season: bobcat, coyote, grey fox, raccoon, the occasional beaver. and sold them through the Kentucky Fur Takers Auction in Hardinsburg every February. He ran a 22-mile loop. He checked it every 36 hours in all weather, on a knee that had been operated on twice and a back that he describes as held together with baling wire and Jesus. He carried a Ruger single 6 in 22 Magnum on his belt for dispatch and a Remington 870 in the truck for everything bigger. He wore the same model of lacrosse Burley Classic boots until the soles separated from the uppers, and then he bought another pair of the same boots. Because Wen is the kind of man who finds a thing that works and stays with it until it breaks. I want you to understand before we go any further that this is not a man who scares easy. In 2017, Wen pulled a 280-pound black bear out of a foothold trap by himself in a hollow with no cell service and walked away with a torn jacket and a bruised forearm. Twice in his career, he has been treed by a sow with cubs. Twice in his career, he has found human bodies on his lines, both lost hunters who had died of exposure and lain in the leaf litter long enough that the coyotes had been at them. Both times, Wen walked back out, drove to the nearest payphone, called the sheriff, and went back to running his line the next morning. That is the man we are talking about. That is the baseline I want you to hold in your head when I tell you what he found in April of last year. His line ran along the eastern edge of the Daniel Boone National Forest, through the Kentonia State Forest Unit, across a string of unnamed hollows that drained into the Paw Fork of the Cumberland River. The country up there is some of the oldest exposed land in North America. It was never glaciated. Those hollows have been hollows for tens of millions of years. The forest is what botanists call mixed mesophytic: beech, sugar maple, tulip poplar with hemlock in the cooler draws and rhododendron thickets so dense in places that a man can walk past a deer at 10 feet and never see it. The southern end of his loop skirted the boundary of Lily Cornet Woods, which is real and which any of you can look up. 554 acres of old-growth forest, the largest unbroken old-growth stand left in eastern Kentucky. Trees that were already tall when Daniel Boone was a child. The Cherokee, the Shawnee, and the Yuchi all crossed this country, and all three of them left stories about parts of it that they would not enter after dark. James Mooney, the Bureau of American Ethnology ethnographer, recorded a lot of those stories in his 1900 volume Myths of the Cherokee, and the ones that get the most academic attention are about Tsul'kalu', the slant-eyed giant, who was said to live on the highest ridges and to hunt the same animals men hunted, but to take only the very best of them. There is a real petroglyph site in Jackson County, North Carolina, called Judiculla Rock, Judiculla being the anglicized version of Tsul'kalu', and it is on the National Register of Historic Places, and the carvings on it have never been fully translated. I am telling you this now because it is going to matter later. Hold on to it. In late February of 2024, Wen started seeing cat sign on the upper third of his loop, not bobcat. He knew bobcat sign the way you know your own handwriting on a grocery list. These tracks were too big. The front pad measured close to 4 inches across. There were no claw marks at the tips, which is the giveaway for a feline as opposed to a canine. A cat's claws retract when it walks. The shape was a cat's foot. The scale was wrong. He photographed 3 sets of tracks across 2 weeks. He sent the photos to a friend who worked seasonal for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. The friend called him back the next day and told him not to send the photos to anyone else. The official position of the department, the friend said, is that there are no breeding mountain lions in Kentucky. any verified track gets logged as a transient individual and does not get publicized. They do not want the calls. They do not want the hunters going out to look. They especially do not want the lawsuits from people who want to know why an animal that the federal government says is extinct keeps showing up on game cameras across half the state. Wen kept running his line. The cat sign kept appearing. By the middle of March, he was finding scat, twisted, hair-packed, the size of a man's thumb and the length of a hot dog, on 3 different ridges. He found a scrape under a rhododendron where something had raked the leaf litter into a mound and urinated on it. He had read about cougar scrapes in the trapping magazines for years. He had never in his life seen one in person. April 11th, 2024 was a Thursday. Wen left his house at 4:30 in the morning. He had 4 sets to check on the high end of the loop. The temperature was 38 degrees. There had been a thin frost overnight. He told me later, and I am going to start using his words now, because the way he tells this is the only way it makes sense. He told me later that the leaf litter crunched under his boots in the way he had always liked, the way that means you are awake before the rest of the world is. The first 3 sets were empty. He was not surprised. The bobcats were starting to den up for the season, and the coyotes were ranging wider than usual. He was already thinking about pulling the line for the year by the end of the month. He was thinking about whether his back could handle 1 more month of the upper loop, or whether he ought to call it. The 4th set was at the head of a hollow he called Bad Spring, because the water there always tasted like iron. He came up the slope from below. The beech tree where he had set the trap was about 60 yards above him on the ridge. He saw the cat from 60 yards out. At first, I thought it was alive, he told me. It was sitting up. Its back was against the trunk of the beech. Its front legs were folded across its chest. Its head was upright and its eyes were open and they were facing me. I stopped walking. I want you to understand what I am telling you. A mountain lion does not sit like that. No animal sits like that. I have seen 10,000 dead animals in the woods in my life, and not one of them was sitting up against a tree with its paws folded. He called out. He says he does not know why. He said hello into the empty woods, the way you would call out to a man you almost surprised on a trail. He waited. The cat did not move, and it was at that moment, he said, that he realized the woods around him had been silent for the last quarter mile of the climb. No birds, no squirrels in the canopy. The wind was up overhead, but nothing on the ground was making a sound. He drew the Ruger and he walked up on the cat slow. When he got to about 15 feet, he could see the animal was dead. The eyes had that flat look. There was no breath in the chest. There was a single wound at the base of the skull, right where the spine meets the head. It was a single puncture, perfectly round, about 3/4 of an inch across. I have killed enough animals to know that wound did not come from a bullet, and it did not come from another animal, he said. The edges were clean. Whatever made it went in once and came out once, and that was all. There was no tearing. There was no ragged edge. It was the cleanest wound I have ever seen on an animal in my life. The cat was a male. Wen could tell from the size of the head and the breadth of the shoulders. He was big. Wen weighed him later with a come-along and a strap that he keeps in the truck for hauling out larger animals. The cat went 138 pounds on the scale. That is not a juvenile dispersing male. That is a full-grown Tom mountain lion in the absolute prime of his life, dead in Letcher County, Kentucky, in April of 2024, posed sitting upright against a beech tree, like somebody had been waiting for Wen to come up the ridge and find him. Wen stood there for what he says was a long time. He does not know how long. The thing he keeps coming back to when he tells the story is that the front paws were folded, not crossed, folded. The right paw was on top of the left, and they were tucked in against the chest, the way a man would fold the hands of his own father in a casket. An animal cannot do that. A dead animal cannot do that. Something had to put those paws in that position after the cat was dead, and before rigor mortis set in. And rigor in a cat that size sets up in about 3 to 4 hours. Whatever did this was there with that animal in the last few hours before Wen walked up the ridge. This is the part that he is ashamed of, and this is the part I want you to listen to closely, because it is the part that tells you exactly how wrong what he was looking at really was. He had a phone in his pocket. He had a camera on the phone. He did not take it out. He did not take a single picture. He told me he could not. He told me it felt like taking a picture of something in a church. He said it felt like taking a picture would be answered. He turned around. He walked back down the ridge to his truck. He drove home. He sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours before he called anyone. And when he finally called, he called the same friend at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The friend asked him 3 questions. Where exactly was it? Was anyone with you? Have you told anyone else? Wen answered all 3. The friend told him not to go back up the ridge alone and said someone would be in touch. Nobody was in touch. Nobody from the state. Nobody from the Federal Forest Service. Nobody from any university wildlife program. Nobody at all. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, Wen drove back up to the trailhead, hiked to the beech tree, and found that the cat was gone. The leaf litter at the base of the tree was disturbed in a way that suggested something had been dragged. The drag marks went uphill, not downhill the way a man or an animal would naturally pull a heavy weight to make the work easier. Uphill. The drag marks went 40 feet up the slope, and then they stopped. There were no continuing tracks. There was no blood. There was nothing. 3 weeks later, in the first week of May, Wen found the second one. This was on a different part of the loop, almost 6 miles from the beech tree. A female, smaller, about 90 pounds. She was not posed against a tree. She was laid out on her side on a bed of fresh hemlock boughs that had been broken from a tree about 30 yards away from where she lay and arranged underneath her body. The wound at the base of her skull was identical. Single puncture, 3/4 of an inch across, clean. This time he took photographs, 11 of them. He still has them on the phone. He has not shown them to the public, and he asked me, when I sat with him at his kitchen table last fall, not to publish them. I gave him my word that I would not. So I'm going to tell you now, on camera, looking at you the way I would look at you across that same kitchen table, that I have seen those photographs. They are real. What is in them is exactly what Wen describes, and the reason I am not showing them to you is the same reason he is not posting them online. Because Wendell Hatcher believes, and I am not saying I believe this, but I am saying he believes it. And after sitting with him, I understand why. Wen believes that whatever did this knows when its work is being looked at. He pulled his line for the year on May 8th, 2024. He has not run a trap line since. He still lives in the same house in Cumberland. He still has the Ruger. He still has the truck. He says he will run a line again one day, but not on that loop, and not in the upper third of any loop that runs into country he does not already know in the daylight. He told me the last thing he did on that ridge before he walked out for the last time was stand at the beech tree and apologize to the cat. I asked him what he was apologizing for. He said for not being able to bury him properly. He said for not being able to take him home. The second story takes us 168 miles south of Wendell Hatcher's beech tree into the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee, into a piece of country called the Catoosa Wildlife Management Area. Catoosa is real. You can pull it up on a map right now. It is about 80,000 acres of oak hickory forest spread across Cumberland and Morgan counties, managed by the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, open to public hunting in season and to research access year-round. It is the kind of place where biologists do their long studies, because it is big enough to hold a real population of black bears and coyotes and turkeys and deer, and it is far enough from the interstate that the camera grids do not get vandalized. In June of 2024, a wildlife biologist working under contract to TWRA was running a trail camera survey on Catoosa as part of a multi-state black bear population study. He had 64 cameras on a grid. He had been pulling cards every 30 days for almost a year. He was 36 years old at the time. He held a master's degree in wildlife ecology from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. He had been running camera grids professionally for 9 years and had personally analyzed somewhere north of 2 million trail cam images in his career. I am not going to use his real name because he still works in wildlife management in the state of Tennessee and asked me not to. For the purposes of this video, I am going to call him Mark. Mark told me that on June 19, 2024, he hiked into camera number 41 of his grid. The camera was mounted on a white oak overlooking a dry creek bed at an elevation of about 2,140 feet. The camera had been in place for 31 days. When Mark pulled the SD card and brought it back to the truck and slotted it into his laptop, the card had 4,706 images on it. The first 4,701 images were what you would expect on a Tennessee camera in early summer. Deer at night in groups of 2 and 3, walking the dry creek bed because it was the path of least resistance through the thicket. A black bear sow with 2 cubs of the year who came past the camera on 4 separate visits over the month. Coyotes, singles and pairs, 6 different nights. A bobcat on 3 different nights, all of them after midnight. Wild turkeys at dawn, raccoons, a grey fox. Nothing on that card in the first 4,701 frames would have made anyone in his profession look up from the screen. Images 4,702 through 4,706 were all taken on the night of June 14th, between 2:47 in the morning and 2:51 in the morning. They were spaced exactly 1 minute apart, which is the camera's reset interval after a motion trigger. The first of those images, image 4,702, shows a mountain lion walking left to right across the frame. Big animal. Mark estimated the weight at about 160 pounds, based on the known dimensions of the white oak in the foreground. The cat is in a hunting posture, head down, body low and forward, tail held in the long horizontal carry that big cats use when they are stalking. Mark told me that when he saw that first image, he stopped breathing for a second. He had never personally photographed a cougar in Tennessee in his entire career. He knew the TWRA confirmed sightings. There have been verified cougar photos from the Bridgestone Firestone Centennial Wilderness going back to 2015. But he had never gotten one himself. His hands started shaking. He zoomed in. He took a screenshot. He kept advancing through the sequence. Image 4,703 is the same cougar, frozen mid-stride, head turned hard to the right, looking off camera at something the camera could not see. The ears are flat against the skull. The body language, Mark told me, is not the body language of a hunting cat. The body language is of a cat that has just realized that it is not the biggest thing in the woods. Image 4,704 is the cougar in a full crouch, belly almost on the ground, facing the same off-camera direction. The reflective tapetum in its eyes, that mirror layer that makes a cat's eyes glow in a flash, is fully blown, maximum dilation. The cat is, in Mark's professional assessment, terrified. Image 4705. The cougar is gone. The frame is empty of the cat entirely. The dry creek bed is visible. The white oak is visible. The tree line on the right side of the image is visible. And standing in the gap between two trees on the right edge of the frame, partially obscured by the trunk of the nearer tree, is a tall, upright shape. The flash did not fully reach it. Mark spent 40 minutes in Photoshop, pulling detail out of the shadows in that part of the image. He told me he did not want to talk too specifically about what he saw when the detail came up, because he is still trying to be a scientist about it, and being a scientist about it is the thing that is keeping him sane. But he gave me 3 details. The shape is between 7 and 8 feet tall, based on the trees in the foreground for scale. The proportions are wrong for a black bear standing on its hind legs. Bears have a barrel chest and a hump at the shoulders that this shape does not have. And the arms, Mark called them arms because he said he did not have another word, come down past where the knees would be if the thing had knees in the right place. Image 4706. The frame is empty. The shape is gone. The cat is gone. There is no motion in the frame that should have triggered a final exposure. The camera fired anyway. Mark has no explanation for why. He drove the SD card directly back to the regional TWRA office in Crossville. He did not make a copy. He told me later that he should have made a copy, and that not making a copy is the second biggest regret of his career. The first being that he ever hiked back to that camera at all. He played the sequence for his supervisor twice. The supervisor did not say anything for a long time. Then the supervisor took the card out of the laptop, walked it over to a desk drawer, put it in the drawer, and locked the drawer. He told Mark that the images were going to be reviewed at the state level, that Mark was not to discuss them with anyone. Not other biologists in his own office, not his wife, not his colleagues at the university, until that review was complete. He said the review would take about 2 weeks. The review was never completed. Or if it was completed, Mark was never told the result. The card was never returned to him. When he asked about it 3 months later, in September, he was told that it had been sent to a lab for authentication and that there was no timeline for its return. He understood, in the way that government employees understand things, that asking again would not be career positive. He kept his job. He kept his mouth shut. He never went back to camera number 41. The camera itself was pulled from the survey grid in August of 2024 and replaced with a unit at a different site, 2 miles to the south. When I sat down with Mark, almost a year after this happened, I asked him what he believed the shape in image 4705 was. He took his time before he answered. He said, "I am a scientist. I have spent my entire adult life looking at trail camera images. I know what motion blur looks like. I know what a bear looks like at the edge of the flash range. I know what a man in dark clothing looks like if he wandered through the frame in the middle of the night. The thing in that image is none of those things. I have looked at it more times than I want to admit. I cannot make it be anything I have a name for." And then he said the part that I want you to hold on to. He said, "The other thing I want to say is about the cougar. I have studied predator behavior for almost a decade. The body language in image 4704 is the body language of an animal that knows it is about to die. I have seen that posture in a deer with a coyote pack closing on it. I have never seen it in an apex predator. Mountain lions do not crouch like that. Nothing in those woods is supposed to make a mountain lion crouch like that. Whatever was off camera in that fifth frame is something that cougars are afraid of. And cougars are not supposed to be afraid of anything in the southern Appalachians. Catoosa is 168 miles in a straight line from the beech tree in Letcher County, where Wendell Hatcher found the first posed cougar. Wen and Mark have never met. They do not know each other's names. Until I sat down with each of them separately, neither of them knew the other's story existed. They are describing the same thing in the same 6-month window in the same mountain range, and the people who would normally be in a position to connect those dots are the people who are sitting on both reports. The third story is the one that made me realize this is not new. In the fall of 1987, a Forest Service wildlife technician was conducting a deer browse survey in a remote ranger district of the Daniel Boone National Forest in the country between Clay and Leslie counties in southeastern Kentucky. He was 41 years old. He had worked for the Forest Service for 11 years at that point. He was the kind of employee who got assigned the long solo hikes because he never complained about them, and he never lost his paperwork. I am going to refer to him by the name his grandchildren gave me permission to use, which is Ray. I am not going to give you his last name because the family has asked me not to, and after reading what they let me read, I understood why. On the 23rd of October, 1987, Ray filed a 4-page incident report with his district office. The report described the discovery of 2 large cat carcasses in a draw off a creek drainage that he names in the report. He identified the animals as mountain lion or panther, which is the older Appalachian term for the same species. He noted that both animals had been killed by a single puncture wound at the base of the skull. He noted that one of the carcasses had been arranged in an unnatural position against the base of a tree. He requested that a wildlife biologist be sent to the site as soon as possible to confirm the species identification, because at the time, in 1987, the official position of the Forest Service was the same as the federal government's position now. There were no breeding mountain lions in Kentucky. No biologist was ever sent. Ray's report was filed. 3 days later, a handwritten note was added to the file by a district ranger whose signature on the original document is partially illegible. The note states that the carcasses had been examined by district staff and identified as bobcat, cause of death undetermined. The original report was not amended. Both documents, Ray's original 4-page report and the unsigned correction note, stayed in the same folder. Ray retired from the Forest Service in 2006. He kept his field notebooks from his entire career in 3 cardboard boxes in the back of his garage. After he was diagnosed with a terminal illness in 2019, he spent the last few months of his life sorting through those boxes. He told his oldest granddaughter that he wanted the notebooks donated to the special collections of an Appalachian college that holds working life materials from the region. I am being deliberately vague about which one, because I want the materials to stay accessible to other researchers, and I do not want the institution swarmed. But the donation was made, the boxes were catalogued, and the notebooks are now in a reading room where any serious researcher can request to see them. I sat in that reading room. I read the notebook for the fall of 1987. I want to read you the entry for October 23rd in his own words, because I think you should hear him say it. Found 2 cats in the drawer, Ray wrote, about 1.25 miles east of the road, both bigger than any bobcat I have ever measured. The first one was up against a hickory tree, sitting up like a man, front paws folded over the chest. I am writing this down because I know how it is going to sound when somebody else reads it. The second one was about 30 feet away, laid out on a bed of pine boughs that had been broken off a tree on the other side of the drawer and carried over. Both of them had a single hole at the base of the skull. The hole was the same size on both of them. Round, clean, about 3/4 of an inch. I want you to stop and think about that for a second. I want you to think about a man in 1987 sitting in a drawer in eastern Kentucky, writing those exact words in a notebook by hand. He had never met Wendell Hatcher. He had never met Mark from Catoosa. Wendell Hatcher was 21 years old in 1987 and had not yet started running his grandfather's old line. Mark was a child. Ray had no possible way of borrowing those details from anyone else, because the details would not exist in any other form for another 37 years. The entry continues. I sat down in that drawer and I waited for my hands to stop shaking before I tried to write any of this. I have been in these woods for 11 years and I have never seen anything like this, and I do not believe what I am looking at. I am going to file the report, and I am going to ask for a biologist to come up here, and I am going to take Reynolds with me when I come back, because I am not coming back here alone. The next page in the notebook is blank. The page after that is a note to himself, written, I think, the same evening, after he got home. He writes, Note to self, ask old man Brock at the store about what the old people used to say about that hollow. He is the one who told me his grandfather would not run hounds up there. I think I know why now, and I think I'm about 30 years too late to do anything about it. Ray never went back to that drawer. The reassignment came down the next week. He spent the rest of his career in a different ranger district, on the other side of the forest. He never wrote about the incident again in any of his notebooks, and he had a new notebook for every fall of every year for the next 19 years. The 1987 notebook ends abruptly on the 4th of November, with 2 blank pages left at the back. He started a new notebook the next morning. In the boxes he donated, the 1987 notebook was the only one with a piece of paper folded inside the back cover. The paper was a single sheet, handwritten, undated. I am going to read it to you exactly the way he wrote it. If anybody is reading this after I am gone, the Bobcat report from October of 1987 is wrong. I know it is wrong because I wrote the original. The animals were not bobcats. I do not know what they were. I know what killed them, and I know it is still up there. Tell my grandchildren to stay out of that drainage. Tell them I am sorry I did not write this down sooner. That is the end of the note. There is no signature. There is no date. The handwriting on the note matches the handwriting in the 1987 notebook. It is the same man, writing alone in his house. Sometime in the years between his retirement and his death, finally putting on paper the thing he had spent 30-something years not saying out loud. So let me lay it out for you plain. 3 men, 3 states adjacent to each other along the same mountain range. 37 years between the first account and the most recent. None of them knew about the others. All 3 of them described the same wound on the same animal in the same place. A single round puncture, 3/4 of an inch across, perfectly clean, at the base of the skull, where the spine meets the head. All 3 of them describe the same posing. One cat sitting upright against the trunk of a tree, with its front paws folded over its chest. A second cat laid out nearby on a bed of green boughs that had been broken from a tree some distance away and carried over. All 3 of them describe the same official response. The report disappears. The reviewer is unavailable. The file gets a quiet correction that nobody signs their full name to. The original document does not get destroyed, because that would be illegal, but it gets buried under a piece of paper that contradicts it, and the contradicting piece of paper gets the official weight. And in all 3 cases, the animal that is being killed is the one animal that is not supposed to be in those mountains at all. The eastern cougar that the federal government formally declared extinct in 2011 and removed from the endangered species list in 2018. The cat that DNA evidence has now placed in Connecticut, in Tennessee, in Kentucky, in Missouri, in places it has no business being. We know these cats are coming back on their own because the science is clean and the DNA does not lie. The famous case is the young male that was hit by an SUV in Milford, Connecticut in June of 2011. Genetic analysis traced that animal back to the Black Hills of South Dakota, a documented overland journey of more than 1,500 miles, the longest movement ever recorded for a land mammal in North America. The cougars are walking back into the eastern forests on their own 4 feet. Something is bringing them, or something is calling them, or they are simply remembering, in whatever way that animals remember, that the eastern forests used to be theirs, and something else is killing them as fast as they arrive. Folks, I am going to do something now that I do not always do, which is step back and tell you what I think. Or rather, tell you what I do not think, because I want to be careful here. I am not going to tell you what is doing this. I have my ideas, and I am sure you have yours. And the comments on this video are going to be full of them by the time it has been up for an hour. Some of you are going to say Skinwalker. Some of you are going to say Sulkalu. Some of you are going to say it is a federal black project, some kind of population control operation that does not want a confirmed breeding cougar in the eastern United States because of what that would mean for land use law. Some of you are going to say it is a cryptid that has been living in the Appalachians for 10,000 years and was here long before the Cherokee gave it a name. I have heard all of those theories. I have a folder full of them on my desk right now. But I do not know. I am a man with a camera and a notebook and 3 witnesses who do not know each other and a stack of paperwork that is real. I have read the Mooney volume. I have stood at the base of the Judaculla rock and looked at carvings that no living person can fully read. I have sat at Wendell Hatcher's kitchen table and watched a man's hands go still on the wood when he tried to describe what he found at the base of a beech tree. I have watched a wildlife biologist with a master's degree from a major research university tell me, very carefully, that the thing in his trail camera image is not a bear and not a man, and not anything he has another word for. I have read a Forest Service technician's last note to his grandchildren, written sometime in the years before he died, telling them to stay out of a drainage in eastern Kentucky and apologizing to them for not having written it down sooner. I do not know what is doing this. I know the cougars are coming back. I know the cougars are dying. I know the wound is the same wound. I know the posing is the same posing. I know the agencies are not interested in connecting the 3 cases, even now that I have laid them out for them, because I made the calls before I made this video, and the calls went exactly the way you would expect the calls to go. The rest of it remains a mystery, and I think the people in the offices in Frankfurt and in Nashville and in Atlanta would rather you did not sit with that mystery for very long. I think they would rather you scrolled past this video and watched something with a clearer ending. I think the discomfort of not knowing is the thing they are counting on. So I'm going to ask you to sit with it. I am going to ask you to think about Wendell Hatcher driving home from his trapline that morning in April with his hands shaking on the wheel of a 2007 Chevy Silverado with 311,000 miles on it. I'm going to ask you to think about Mark in the regional office in Crossville, watching his supervisor lock an SD card in a drawer. I am going to ask you to think about Ray, alone in his house some evening between 2006 and 2019, writing a note to his grandchildren on a single sheet of paper and folding it into the back cover of a notebook he had not opened in 30 years. And I am going to ask you to think about the cats, the ones that walked 1,500 miles to come home, and the ones that are still walking, and the ones that are going to keep arriving in those mountains every year from now on, because that is what cougars do. They come back. They have always come back. Something in those forests has been waiting for them. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, comment the word "hollow" below so I know who is still with me. Hit the subscribe button if you are new here, and hit it again if it does not take, because YouTube has been doing that to a lot of you, and I hear about it every week. I love you all. I will see you on the next one.